"Don't come any closer," she warned, blocking the tent's entrance. But the flap shifted in the wind, and the cowboy caught a glimpse inside. 4 children, silent, their eyes sunken from hunger. Who had left them in this state? And why did she look more afraid of him than of their starvation? The flap fell shut again, the fabric trembling in the wind. The cowboy's gaze stayed fixed on her, the basket of wet clothes still at her feet. "Move aside," he said quietly. She shook her head, arms folding across her chest. "You've already seen too much." Behind her, the faint scrape of a bowl on the floorboards, followed by a cough, dry, shallow, and far too weak for a child that young. He stepped closer, boots sinking into the soft dirt. "They need food." Her jaw tightened. "We all do." From somewhere beyond the mesquites, a horse whinnied. The sound was distant, but her eyes darted toward it as if it were only feet away. "Someone's coming?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she bent to grab the basket, turning her shoulder toward him as if to end the conversation. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of smoke, not fresh, but the lingering trace of a fire burned too small to keep anyone warm. He caught her wrist, not rough, but enough to stop her. "If it's trouble, I can help." Her eyes lifted to his, and in them was something heavier than fear. "You don't know what kind of trouble this is." The sound of the horse grew clearer, hooves on dry earth, unhurried but closing in. She stepped in front of the tent again, her back to the approaching rider, her gaze locked on him. "You need to leave," she whispered. "Now." The horse's breathing was the first thing he heard as the rider broke through the mesquite line, slow, deliberate, as if every step was chosen. The cowboy turned slightly, enough to see the man in the saddle without giving away just how tightly his hand now hovered near his holster. The rider was tall in the saddle, hat brim low, a long coat brushing against the stirrups. His eyes, shadowed by the brim, never left the cowboy's face. "Afternoon?" the man drawled. His voice was low, even, too even. "Afternoon," the cowboy returned, his tone neutral. "You looking for someone?" The man's gaze slid past him toward the woman, still standing square in front of the tent. "Maybe I already found them." Her fingers tightened in the fabric at her sides, knuckles whitening. "We're not hiring today." The rider chuckled under his breath. "Didn't come for work." His eyes shifted back to the cowboy. "You her new friend?" The cowboy didn't move. "I'm just here for laundry." "That's so." The man's smile thinned. "Looks like you're about to take on a little more than clean clothes." The air between them felt heavier now. A gust of wind rattled the dry leaves, but no one moved. The cowboy took a slow step forward, closing the space just enough to make the next words carry weight. "If you've got business, say it." The rider leaned slightly in the saddle. "Business is simple. She owes, been owing for months. Debt's got to get paid." The woman's voice cut sharp. "I said I'd pay when I could." "You said that last time," the man replied, his eyes still locked on the cowboy. "But now she's got company. That changes things." A sound came from inside the tent, a small, frightened whimper. The rider's head turned toward it, slow and deliberate. "Ah, so that's why you've been short on payment." The cowboy stepped between him and the tent without thinking. "You've said enough." The rider's eyes narrowed. "You planning to stand for her? Planning to keep you from walking over her?" the cowboy said evenly. For a moment, it was just the creak of saddle leather and the faint clink of a spur swaying in the wind. Then the rider straightened, his smile gone. "Careful, stranger. You're playing in someone else's game." The cowboy didn't blink. "Looks like the game just changed." The man studied him for another long second, then tugged the reins, turning the horse slightly toward the trail. "Tell her she's got 3 days. After that." He let the words trail off, the silence finishing the sentence for him. Dust rose in the air as he rode off, not fast on, but with the slow certainty of a man who knew he would be back. Only when the sound of hoofbeats faded did the cowboy turn back to her. "You want to explain that?" She busied herself with the basket again, avoiding his gaze. "You don't need to know. I think I do." Her shoulders rose and fell. "They were my husband's debts. He's gone. Now they're mine. And they send men like that to collect? They send worse?" she said quietly. From inside, one of the children called to her in Apache, the tone anxious. She answered softly, the words like a soothing rhythm, and the tent went quiet again. The cowboy stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Why haven't you left?" She looked past him, toward the hills where the rider had disappeared. "Where would we go? You think anyone's hiring an Apache woman with 4 mouths to feed?" Her tone wasn't bitter. It was tired, worn thin, the kind of tired that didn't leave room for hope. He glanced toward the tent. When was the last time they had a full meal? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The cowboy exhaled slowly, then glanced toward the west where the sun was dipping lower. "Get them ready. Tonight, you're not sleeping here." She shook her head immediately. "If he finds us, if he finds you here, you've already lost." Her lips pressed into a line. "Why would you risk this? You don't even know us." The cowboy's gaze was steady. "I know enough." The flap lifted slightly, and the oldest boy stepped out, eyes darting between them. He clutched a thin blanket around his shoulders, his frame too light for his age. The cowboy looked at him, then back at her. "We move at sundown." Her silence lasted a long moment. Then she nodded once. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote yipped, the sound sharp against the stillness. It faded quickly, leaving only the low hiss of wind in the mesquite. The cowboy adjusted his hat, scanning the horizon. He knew the rider hadn't gone far. And if the man had given them 3 days, it was only because he thought they'd be here when he came back. He wasn't planning on giving him that chance. By the time the sun slipped below the ridge, the clearing was bathed in a muted red glow. The cowboy stood near the edge of the mesquites, watching the shadows lengthen across the dry earth. He'd already packed his saddlebag, just enough food, water, and ammunition to keep them moving for a couple of days. Inside the tent, hushed voices murmured in Apache. The woman emerged first, the youngest child asleep in her arms, his head resting against her shoulder. The other 3 followed, each clutching something small, blankets, a tin cup, a worn doll with one button eye. "We'll ride double," the cowboy said. "It'll be slower, but we need to stick together." She hesitated, scanning the darkening tree line. "If we leave tracks, they'll find them no matter what," he cut in. "The trick is making sure they can't read where they lead." She met his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Which way?" He pointed toward the narrow cut between 2 low hills. "Northwest. There's a creek bed a few miles in. We follow it west. Tracks won't hold in the sand." They mounted up, the cowboy taking the oldest boy behind him, while the woman rode with the 2 youngest. The middle child clung to her back, his face buried against her coat. As they moved out, the last of the sunlight bled away, leaving only the silver wash of the rising moon. The air cooled quickly, and the rhythmic clop of hooves on hard ground was the only sound for a long stretch. It wasn't until they reached the creek bed that the woman spoke again. "That man, he's not the worst of them." The cowboy glanced at her. "Who is?" "They call him Crowder. He runs the collections for half the territory. The man today is just one of his hands." The name meant nothing to the children, but the cowboy saw the way her jaw tightened when she said it. "Has Crowder been here before?" She nodded once. "Twice. Never alone." They pressed on in silence. The creek bed wound like a pale ribbon between the hills, the sand soft under the horses' hooves. The cowboy kept an ear tuned for any sound that didn't belong, the snap of a twig, the clink of tack. Half an hour later, it came. Faint, but there, somewhere behind them, the echo of hooves against stone. He raised a hand, signaling to stop. The children shifted restlessly, whispering in low voices. The woman's eyes searched his face. "You hear it too?" He nodded. "They're tracking us." Her hand tightened on the reins. "We can't outrun them like this." "I'm not planning to outrun them." He dismounted, moving quickly to the rear of the group. "You keep riding west in the bed. I'm going to split off here, circle back and see how close they are." She shook her head sharply. "If they see you alone, they won't," he said, already loosening the rifle from its scabbard. "But if they're close enough to catch us tonight, we need to know now." The oldest boy's voice was small. "What if they take her while you're gone?" The cowboy's gaze softened for a fraction of a second. "They won't. I'll be right behind you." Reluctantly, She urged her horse forward. The children huddled against her. The creek bed curved gently west, the shadows deepening where the moonlight couldn't reach. The cowboy waited until they were out of sight before moving up the bank. He climbed a low rise, belly to the ground, and peered back the way they'd come. 2 riders were in the bed, maybe 300 yards back. One carried a lantern, the glow swinging in a slow arc as they scanned the sand for sign. The other kept his head low, eyes on the ground. They were methodical, too methodical for men just passing through. The cowboy stayed low, watching until they reached a bend in the creek bed. Then he slipped back down, mounted up, and pushed the mare into a trot to catch up with the others. When he rejoined them, the woman's eyes were sharp with unspoken questions. "They're close," he said quietly. "Maybe an hour back." She swallowed hard. "Then what?" "Then we make sure they lose more than just our trail." They rode on for another mile before he found what he was looking for, a narrow wash feeding into the creek from the north. The sand here was broken by scattered boulders and low brush, perfect for hiding fresh sign. He led them into the wash, keeping their pace slow to avoid kicking up too much dust. After a few hundred yards, the walls narrowed until only one horse could pass at a time. "Up ahead, there's a rock shelf," he said. "We'll stop there and make camp. If they follow, we'll have the high ground." The woman's gaze flicked to the children, then back to him. "And if they don't? Then we keep moving at first light." They reached the shelf, a flat rise about 10 feet above the wash floor. The cowboy helped the children down first, then offered his hand to her. She ignored it, climbing up on her own, but stayed close as he began checking the ground for approach routes. The night deepened around them, the cold settling in. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, the sound carrying over the still air. Below, the wash lay quiet, but the cowboy knew it wouldn't stay that way for long, and when the riders came, he intended to make sure they thought twice about following again. The cold settled deeper as the moon climbed higher, silver light spilling across the rock shelf. The children huddled together under the woman's blanket, their breathing slow but uneasy. The cowboy crouched near the edge, rifle resting across his knees, eyes fixed on the dark ribbon of the wash below. She moved quietly to his side, arms folded against the chill. "How long before they get here?" He didn't look away. "Soon? You've done this before," she said, more statement than question. He nodded once. "Enough to know men like that count on you being scared." She glanced back at the children. "I am scared." "That's fine," he said evenly. "Just don't let them see it." A faint sound broke the stillness, a clink of metal, the soft thud of a hoof on sand. The cowboy's posture shifted subtly, every muscle sharpening. "They're here." 2 figures emerged from the shadows of the wash, the lantern's light bobbing between them. They moved slower now, eyes sweeping the ground, one dismounted, crouching low to study the sand, while the other kept the lantern raised. The woman's voice was a whisper. "They'll see the tracks." "They already have," he murmured. The man on foot straightened, calling something in a low voice to his partner. Both turned their heads toward the narrowing of the wash, the trail that led directly to the rock shelf. The cowboy rose slowly, stepping into the moonlight where they could see him. "Evening, boys." Both froze. The lantern tilted slightly. "Where's the woman?" one of them called. "She's not your concern," the cowboy said. The rider shifted in the saddle. "Crowder wants her back, and the kids." "We're just here to collect." "Then you rode a long way for nothing," the cowboy replied. The man on the ground reached for his pistol. The cowboy's voice cut the motion in half. "You draw, you die. Simple as that." For a moment, no one moved. Then the rider gave a dry laugh. "You think you can take both of us before one of us gets you?" The cowboy didn't answer. He simply stepped forward, leveling the rifle. The sound of the lever action chambering around echoed in the narrow space, the metallic click sharp against the quiet night. The dismounted man raised his hand slightly, a mocking gesture. "All right, we'll take a message back." The woman's voice, cold and steady, came from the shadows behind the cowboy. "No, they'll just come again." The 2 men glanced at each other, the rider's jaw tightening. "You've got some nerve, lady." The rest was drowned out by the crack of the rifle. A puff of sand erupted inches from the rider's boot. His horse shied, nearly unseating him. "Next one won't miss," the cowboy said flatly. The man on foot cursed under his breath, backing toward his partner. "We'll be seeing you again." "Not if you've got sense," the cowboy said. They retreated slowly, not turning their backs until the lantern light began to fade into the distance. The sound of hoofbeats carried for a while, then vanished into the cold night air. Silence returned, but it wasn't the kind that brought relief. It was the heavy pause before a storm. The woman stepped closer. "You didn't kill them." "Not tonight," he said, "but they'll tell Crowder where we're headed." Her brow furrowed. "Then what now?" The cowboy looked past her to the children, asleep in a fragile tangle of limbs. "Now we make sure when he comes, he's not ready for what he finds." Far off, a coyote called again. This time, it sounded closer. The first pale light of dawn crept over the ridge, painting the wash in muted gold. The air was cold enough to sting with each breath, and the cowboy's boots left crisp impressions in the frost-tipped sand as he moved. He'd been awake for hours, checking the edges of their camp, studying the ground where the two riders had stood the night before. Their tracks led back the way they'd come, but the weight of his gut told him they hadn't gone far. The woman emerged from behind the tent flap, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "They're still out there, aren't they?" He didn't answer right away, scanning the horizon. "They'll be waiting for Crowder. Men like that don't ride all night just to turn back empty-handed." She stepped closer, her voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "If Crowder's coming himself..." She didn't finish the sentence. The cowboy slung his saddlebag over his shoulder. "Then we make sure we're not here when he does." Matthew, the oldest boy, pushed the flap aside and stepped into the light, rubbing his eyes. "I can ride with you again," he said quietly, as if volunteering for a task no one wanted. "You will," the cowboy replied, his tone steady. "But today we move fast. No stops until midday." The younger children stirred behind him, a chorus of sleepy murmurs. The woman ducked back into the tent, gathering what little food and water they had left. When she re-emerged, her jaw was set. "We can be ready in 10 minutes. They broke camp quickly, leaving no more trace than the scuff of hooves on stone. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, they were riding along the high edge of the wash, the frost melting into dark patches in their path. The land here opened into rolling grassland, dotted with scattered junipers, the kind of country where a man could see trouble coming from miles away, or be seen himself. The cowboy kept glancing over his shoulder. The open space was both a blessing and a curse. There was no sign of riders yet, but it meant there'd be no hiding if they appeared. "Where does this lead?" the woman asked. "To a canyon, about 20 miles out," he said, "narrow enough to hide in. If we make it there, we buy a day or two." She frowned. "And after that?" His answer was clipped. "We keep moving." Hours passed in the steady rhythm of hooves on packed earth. The sun climbed higher, taking the edge off the cold, but a different weight settled over them, a silence that wasn't peace, but anticipation. By midday, they reached a small rise. From the top, the cowboy scanned the country behind them. At first, it was empty. Then, a faint shimmer of movement caught his eye, a speck on the horizon where the grass rippled wrong. He squinted, the brim of his hat cutting the glare. Riders. 3 this time. He turned the horse down slope, his voice low but urgent. "We've got company." The woman's grip tightened on her reins. "Is it him?" "Too far to tell," he said, "but they're closing faster than I'd like." They pressed the horses harder, the children clinging tight. The grassland began to give way to rougher country, scattered rocks breaking the ground into uneven rises. Matthew called over the sound of hooves. "If they're faster, we can't outrun them." The cowboy's eyes flicked to the boy, then to the woman. "He's right. So we don't try to outrun them." She shot him a look. "Then what?" "We make them think they've got us, then take away their advantage." He veered toward a jagged outcrop ahead, its shadow stretching long across the ground. From here, the canyon mouth lay just beyond, hidden from view. "We'll split here," he said. "You take the kids through the rocks and keep riding into the canyon. I'll slow them down." Her expression tightened. "If it's Crowder..." "Then you keep riding," he interrupted. "Don't stop until you can't hear anything behind you." The oldest girl in the group clung to her mother's waist, wide-eyed. What if they find us anyway? The cowboy gave her a steady look. They won't. Not if you do exactly what I said. They reached the outcrop. He pulled his horse to a halt and swung down in one fluid motion, handing the reins to Matthew. Go. The woman hesitated, her eyes locked on him. Don't get yourself killed. He almost smiled, not planning to. With that, she urged the horse forward, the children disappearing one by one into the maze of stone. The sound of their hoofbeats faded quickly, swallowed by the canyon beyond. The cowboy moved to higher ground, loading a fresh round into the rifle. Dust was rising now, 3 riders, close enough for him to see the glint of sunlight on steel. He settled into position, the barrel steady, the wind at his back. When the first rider broke into range, he exhaled slowly and took aim. The first rider came into view at full gallop, his coat flaring out behind him, eyes locked on the trail where the woman and children had vanished. The cowboy tracked him through the sights, the rifle steady. At the last second, he shifted aim lower, one clean shot to the ground just ahead of the horse. The crack echoed off the rocks. The animal reared, screaming, throwing the rider sideways into the dust. The other 2 slowed instinctively, their formation breaking. One swung wide to the left, looking for a flanking route, while the third urged his horse forward, teeth bared in a grin that looked more like a snarl. The cowboy didn't give him the chance. Another shot, this time splintering a chunk of stone inches from the man's knee. The message was clear, 1 step closer, and he wouldn't miss. From below, the first rider staggered to his feet, sand clinging to the sweat on his face. "You're a dead man," he shouted, reaching for his revolver. The cowboy's voice carried back, calm as if they were discussing the weather. "Put it down. Walk away." The second rider on the flank tried his luck, angling through a narrow gap in the rocks. The cowboy pivoted, anticipating the move, and sent a bullet ricocheting off the wall so close the man ducked flat against his horse's neck. Dust rose thick in the gap as the rider pulled back. The air was filled with the restless snorts of horses, the scrape of hooves on stone. "You think you can hold us off forever?" the man in the middle called. "I only need long enough," the cowboy said. For a moment, the 3 seemed to hesitate, weighing whether he was worth the risk. Then, far off down the trail, the faint echo of other hoofbeats reached them. The cowboy caught the sound immediately, and so did they. One of them turned in his saddle. "Crowder's coming." The name hung in the air like a sudden drop in temperature. The cowboy's jaw tightened. If Crowder was close enough to be heard, they had minutes, maybe less, before the odds shifted from 3 to 1 to impossible. The lead rider sneered, "Guess you won't be so brave when he gets here." The cowboy stepped forward into full view, the sun glinting off the rifle barrel. "Then you better hope you're not standing where I can see you when he does." That broke them. One pulled his horse back sharply, spinning in the sand. The other 2 followed. Not fleeing exactly, but falling back to meet whoever was coming up the trail. The cowboy stayed still until their dust cloud began to settle. Only then did he turn and scramble down toward the canyon mouth, moving fast but keeping low. Inside the canyon, the light dimmed immediately, the air cooler. The sound of the woman's horse was faint but traceable, echoing off the stone walls. He followed it through a narrow bend, then found them waiting in a shaded alcove. The children were quiet but wide-eyed, their gazes flicking between him and the canyon entrance. "You stopped them?" the woman asked. "For now," he said. Her eyes narrowed. "For now isn't enough if Crowder's with them." "That's why we keep moving," he replied, already swinging into the saddle. "We've got maybe an hour before they regroup." The youngest boy clung tighter to her waist as she mounted up. The cowboy led the way deeper into the canyon, the walls towering higher on either side. Every turn felt like a coin toss. Would it lead them further from danger, or box them in completely? They pressed on until the canyon split into 2 narrow corridors. The cowboy slowed, studying the ground. "Tracks go left," he murmured, "which means they'll expect us to do the same." "So we go right?" she asked. He shook his head. "We go left, but not far. There's a ledge 100 yards in where we can climb up and cross over. They'll ride past thinking we're still ahead." Matthew's voice was quiet but steady. "What if they search the walls?" "They won't," the cowboy said. "Not unless they're desperate. And by the time they are, we'll be long gone." They took the left path. the canyon narrowing until the horses had to go single file. The ledge came into view, a steep but climbable slope of crumbling stone. The cowboy dismounted, handing his reins to Matthew. "Get them up there, I'll cover the rear." The woman started to protest, but he cut her off with a sharp look. "Go!" As she began leading the children up, the cowboy crouched low, rifle ready, listening for the first echo of pursuit. The canyon was still for a few breaths. Then, faintly, the distant sound of hooves. He looked up to see the last of the children scramble over the top of the ledge, the woman's hand steadying them. She glanced down at him once, her eyes hard but not afraid. "Move," she mouthed. The sound of pursuit was growing clearer now. He grabbed the edge of the slope and hauled himself upward, boots slipping on loose rock, the grit biting into his palms. Halfway up, the first shadow appeared at the mouth of the canyon. The shadow lengthened against the canyon wall, solidifying into the figure of a rider. The brim of his hat cut deep into the sunlight, leaving only his mouth visible, a thin, unwavering line. Behind him, two more riders fanned out at the entrance, their silhouettes dark against the pale stone. The cowboy's boots found the last bit of purchase, hauling him over the ledge. He stayed low, peering over the edge, just enough to see the lead rider dismount. Crowder. Even at this distance, the man carried an air that made the others hang back a pace. He moved slowly, deliberately, brushing the dust from his coat sleeve as if the canyon itself should feel honored by his presence. "Trail's fresh," one of his men said, pointing to the hoofprints in the sand. Crowder crouched, running a gloved finger along the track. 5, maybe 6 hours ahead, he murmured. Then he straightened, his voice carrying easily. "They're close. And they're tired." The cowboy shifted, careful to keep his rifle barrel from catching the light. Above him, the woman was gathering the children in a small hollow just beyond the ledge, urging them to stay silent. Crowder walked forward a few steps, eyes scanning the canyon walls. He didn't seem to be searching, more like listening, feeling the place. "You smell that?" he said suddenly. One of his men frowned. "Smell what?" "Dust and sweat," Crowder replied, tilting his head slightly. "They're here." The cowboy's grip tightened on the rifle. He could drop him now. One shot. End it before Crowder got another word out. But killing a man like Crowder in front of his own would be like lighting a fuse. There'd be no walking away. Crowder's gaze drifted toward the ledge, slow and unhurried, as if he already knew. "You got a name, stranger?" The cowboy didn't answer. Crowder smiled faintly. "Didn't think so. You hiding her up there? Or just playing hero until you get bored?" From the hollow, the woman's whisper barely reached him. "Don't answer him." Crowder took another step forward, his boots silent on the sand. "See, I make it a rule not to kill a man without knowing his name. Feels impersonal otherwise. But I'll break the rule if you make me." The cowboy finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying. "You want her, you're going to have to climb." One of Crowder's men barked a laugh. "We can do that." Crowder lifted a hand, silencing him. "Oh, I'm sure we can. But climbing means putting my head where a bullet can find it. I don't much like those odds." He took a few steps back, turning slightly to his men. "Fetch the long guns." The cowboy's jaw tightened. Rifles. If they got into position below, they could pin him and the woman up here until nightfall, and nightfall would be worse. He glanced over his shoulder. The woman was already gathering the children to move. "There's another way out?" he asked. "Maybe," she whispered. "But it's narrow. The kids will have to crawl." Crowder's voice rang out again, conversational in tone. "I'll give you 2 minutes to think it over. After that, I start shooting." The cowboy motioned for her to go. "Take them. I'll keep him busy." Her eyes locked on his. "And then?" He didn't answer. She didn't waste another breath. Taking Matthew's hand, she led the others deeper into the narrow fissure at the back of the hollow. Their footsteps faded quickly on the stone. Below, one of Crowder's men returned carrying 2 rifles. Crowder accepted one, cradling it with casual ease. "Last chance, me stranger." The cowboy called back, "You'll have to work harder than that." Crowder chuckled, low and cold. "Oh, I plan to." He lifted the rifle to his shoulder. The cowboy dropped flat as the first shot cracked, a shard of stone exploding inches from his head. He rolled to the side, sighted down his own barrel, and returned fire, not at Crowder, but at the lantern still hanging from one of the horses. The glass shattered, flames leaping before dying in the sand, plunging their side of the canyon into deeper shadow. Crowder lowered his rifle, the smile gone now. That was a mistake. From deep within the fissure, the faint cry of one of the children reached the cowboy's ears. Crowder's head tilted slightly at the sound. "You've got cargo," he said softly, "and that makes this interesting." He took a slow step forward, his rifle still in hand. "Boys, we're climbing." The cowboy chambered another round, the click loud in the narrow space. He knew the climb would be slow, but if Crowder started up, it meant only one thing. The fight was coming to him, and there'd be no backing down. Crowder's men moved first, slinging their rifles and grabbing at the rock face. The sandstone crumbled under their boots, sending small avalanches of grit cascading into the wash. Crowder stayed at the base, eyes never leaving the cowboy, the faintest smirk pulling at one corner of his mouth. The cowboy crouched low, shifting position along the ledge to keep a clear angle. He didn't want them reaching the top, but he also couldn't afford to kill one outright unless there was no other choice. Every second had to be bought, not spent. The first climber reached halfway up when the cowboy fired a shot into the rock just inches from his hand. The man jerked back, lost his grip, and slid down the face, boots scrambling for purchase before he hit the sand with a curse. "Get up there," Crowder barked, the calm in his voice now edged with steel. The second man tried the opposite side, climbing in short bursts. The cowboy moved quickly along the lip, his boots silent against the stone, and leaned over far enough to knock loose a chunk of rock with the butt of his rifle. It tumbled down, striking the man's shoulder and sending him sprawling backward. Crowder didn't flinch. He tilted his head back, calling up, "You're not bad. Makes me wonder why you're wasting yourself on people who can't pay their debts." The cowboy's reply was sharp. "Maybe I'm just not fond of bullies." Crowder smiled without humor. "That's a dangerous preference in this country." Below, the first man began climbing again, this time hugging the wall tighter, making himself a smaller target. The cowboy's eyes darted to the fissure at his back. No sound now, no movement. The woman and the children were either far enough to be safe, or trapped somewhere he couldn't see. He dropped to one knee, aimed, and fired again, the shot sending shards of rock raining down over the climber's head. This time the man froze, clinging to the wall as if unsure whether to go up or down. Crowder's patience snapped. "Fine. Keep him busy." He slung his own rifle, grabbed a low handhold, and started climbing himself. The cowboy's pulse kicked harder. Crowder climbed like a man who'd done it 100 times, steady, deliberate, wasting no movement. The cowboy backed up a step, then another, trying to buy space. His boots found the edge of the hollow, the darkness behind him yawning like an open mouth. "You step back one more time," Crowder called up, "and you're in the hole. You think I won't follow?" The cowboy didn't answer. Instead, he aimed low and fired at the stone just under Crowder's hand. Chips flew, but Crowder didn't falter. He just shifted to a new grip and kept coming. The distance between them closed fast. 10 feet, 8, 6. Crowder's voice was calm again. "When I get up there, we're going to have a talk. You'll answer my questions, and maybe I'll let you walk out alive." The cowboy chambered another round, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. "You're welcome to try." From the fissure, a faint scraping noise reached him, the sound of boots against rock. The woman's voice, low and urgent, urged the children onward. Relief flickered in his chest, but it didn't slow his hands. Crowder was 3 feet from the lip now, his fingers curling over the edge. The cowboy shifted his rifle, aiming straight down the barrel into the man's face. Crowder only smiled. "Go on, pull it." For a heartbeat, the canyon was silent. Then a sharp crack split the air, not from the cowboy's rifle, but from somewhere deep in the fissure. A rock slide. Both men turned their heads toward the sound. Crowder's smile widened. "Seems like your cargo hit a snag." The cowboy's gut twisted. He risked one step toward the fissure, and in that moment, Crowder lunged, grabbing the ledge with both hands and hauling himself up in a surge of muscle. The cowboy spun, but Crowder was already on the rock, low and fast, closing the gap with a predator's focus. Crowder came in low, one arm sweeping wide to knock the rifle aside. The cowboy twisted, letting the blow glance off, but the force still drove him back toward the fissure. The rifle clattered to the stone, skidding out of reach. Crowder's fist came next, a short, brutal punch aimed at the ribs. The cowboy caught most of it on his elbow, but the impact jarred his arm numb. They circled each other on the narrow lip, boots scraping grit over the edge. One misstep here, and a man could drop 20 feet into the canyon floor. Crowder's voice was steady, almost conversational despite the fight. "You're fast, but you're fighting for people you barely know. Why?" The cowboy didn't answer. Instead, he feinted left, then drove a shoulder into Crowder's chest, forcing him back a step. Crowder absorbed it, grinning. "That all you got?" A hard right hook came toward the cowboy's jaw. He ducked under it, grabbed Crowder's coat, and tried to twist him toward the drop. But Crowder planted his boots, pivoted, and slammed the cowboy into the rock wall. Stone bit into his shoulder blade, the shock knocking air from his lungs. Crowder followed with a knee to the midsection, but the cowboy turned just enough to take it on the hip instead of the gut. Below, one of Crowder's men shouted up, "Boss!" The distraction was brief, but the cowboy used it, catching Crowder's wrist, wrenching it down, and sending his revolver clattering over the edge. Crowder didn't flinch. "I don't need a gun to finish you." They locked up again, forearms straining, each trying to overpower the other. The grit underfoot made traction uncertain. Crowder suddenly stepped back, pulling the cowboy with him, then pivoted hard. The cowboy's momentum nearly sent him off balance, but he caught himself on the wall. From deep in the fissure came another noise, the scrape of rock shifting, a child's stifled cry. Crowder's head tilted toward it. "They're still here." The cowboy stepped in, blocking his line of sight. "Not for long." Crowder swung, a backhand meant to clear space, but the cowboy ducked under it and drove an elbow into his ribs. The breath left Crowder in a sharp grunt. The cowboy followed with a shove, pushing him toward the canyon edge. Crowder's boots skidded in the grit, but he caught himself on one knee, his hand gripping the rock lip. "Careful," Crowder said, his tone almost amused. "You might start thinking you can win." The cowboy didn't answer. He lunged, but Crowder was ready, twisting aside and using the cowboy's own momentum to spin him dangerously close to the drop. For a second, his heel hung over empty air. Crowder stepped in, low and fast, and locked a hand around the front of the cowboy's shirt. "End of the trail, stranger." The cowboy's left hand shot up, gripping Crowder's wrist, while his right found a loose stone near the ledge. He swung it hard, catching Crowder just above the temple. The blow staggered him, enough for the cowboy to break free. Crowder stumbled, shaking his head once like a man clearing water from his ears, then bared his teeth in something between a grin and a snarl. "You're gonna regret that." From inside the fissure, the woman's voice rang out, sharper now. "We're clear." Crowder's eyes flicked toward the sound, and that was all the cowboy needed. He stepped in, hooked Crowder's leg with his own, and drove him backward. Crowder hit the rock with a grunt, his back against the drop. One slip, and he'd be gone. But instead of panic, Crowder's expression settled into a cold smile. "You think this ends with me falling? You don't know me at all." He lunged again. Crowder's sudden lunge caught the cowboy square in the chest, driving them both toward the edge. Boots scraped on the stone, sending a rain of grit tumbling into the canyon. The world narrowed to raw force and the yawning drop behind him. The cowboy twisted, trying to turn Crowder's momentum into a sidestep, but Crowder was too close, too heavy. Their forearms locked, muscles straining. Every breath came sharp and fast. "Go ahead," Crowder said through gritted teeth. "Let's see who the canyon takes first." The cowboy's heel hit nothing, just air. His boot slid off the ledge, balance tipping. He drove his shoulder into Crowder, regaining just enough ground to plant that foot again. But Crowder anticipated it, shifting his weight and forcing the cowboy into another stumble. From below, one of Crowder's men yelled, "Boss, pull him over!" The cowboy angled his body, trying to push Crowder sideways instead of back, but the move opened his left flank, and Crowder's knee came up hard, knocking the wind out of him. Pain flared through his ribs. The cowboy gritted his teeth and swung his forearm across Crowder's face. The blow snapped Crowder's head to the side, but he didn't loosen his grip. The drop behind them seemed closer now, the sound of the wind in the canyon like a low roar in the cowboy's ears. Crowder leaned in, his voice low. "You can't win. You'll tire first, and when you do, She's mine. That was the spark. The cowboy shifted his weight abruptly, breaking Crowder's hold just enough to twist. His boot hooked behind Crowder's ankle, and with a hard shove, he sent the man stumbling backward. Crowder's arms pinwheeled for balance, but one hand caught the cowboy's shirt, yanking him forward. They both went down. The cowboy's chest hit the stone hard. Crowder half over the ledge. His fingers clawed for a grip, finding the edge of the rock. The cowboy, flat on his stomach, had one hand gripping Crowder's coat collar, the other scraping for something solid. Their eyes met, Crowder's cold, calculating even now. If I go, I'm taking you with me. The cowboy's boot finally found a crack in the rock, anchoring him. He tightened his grip on Crowder's collar, hauling him partway back. But before Crowder's boots found solid stone, his free hand flashed toward his belt. The glint of steel caught the sunlight. Knife. The cowboy saw it coming, twisting just enough that the blade cut into his sleeve instead of his side. Fabric tore, and the smell of dust and sweat filled his nose. With his other hand, he drove his fist into Crowder's wrist. The knife tumbled into the canyon, spinning end over end before vanishing from sight. Crowder snarled, trying to surge upward again, but the cowboy shifted his grip and used Crowder's own weight against him, rolling him sideways, away from the ledge. They both scrambled to their feet, breathing hard, dust clinging to sweat. The cowboy reached for his rifle, lying just a few feet away. Crowder saw it too. They dove at the same time. Fingers brushed cold steel, then a sharp report cracked through the canyon, not from the cowboy's rifle, but from deeper in the fissure. Crowder froze. A second later, a small rock slide poured from the narrow pass, dust billowing. Through it stepped the woman, her hands steady on a pistol that looked too heavy for her frame. Matthew stood behind her, a rock in each hand, ready to throw. "You're not touching them," she said, her voice flat but carrying. Crowder's eyes flicked between them. "You think you'll shoot me in front of him?" He nodded toward the boy. Her grip didn't waver. "If it keeps him alive." The cowboy rose slowly, rifle now in his hands. "This ends here, Crowder." But Crowder's smirk returned, faint and dangerous. "Maybe, or maybe it's just starting." His gaze shifted, not to them, but past them, somewhere deeper in the canyon, and the cowboy's gut went cold. The cowboy followed Crowder's gaze into the shadows behind the woman. At first, he saw nothing but the rough bend of the fissure. Then the sound came, a slow, deliberate crunch of boots on gravel. 3 silhouettes emerged, one after another, filling the narrow gap. These weren't the dust-caked drifters Crowder usually kept around. Their coats were clean, their rifles polished, and their movements measured. Crowder's smirk widened. "You didn't think I'd come without my insurance, did you?" The woman stiffened, shifting slightly to put herself between the newcomers and the children. The boy's grip on his rocks tightened until his knuckles went white. The cowboy kept his rifle trained on Crowder. "They take one more step and you'll be the first to drop." Crowder didn't flinch. "That's the problem with playing hero, stranger. You've only got 2 hands, but I've got more than 2 enemies in your line of sight." The 3 newcomers halted just a few paces inside the fissure, blocking the only way out. One of them, a tall man with a scar cutting through his eyebrow, spoke for the first time. "Boss, and you want them alive?" Crowder's answer came smooth. "For now." The cowboy's mind raced. Even if he dropped Crowder in the first shot, those 3 would have an open line to the woman and the kids, and in this narrow space, there'd be no cover. The woman's voice cut in, quiet but sharp. "There's another path." Crowder caught it instantly. "She's bluffing." Her eyes didn't move from the cowboy's. "I'm not." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "How far?" "Close enough," she said. "But we have to move now." The man with the scar took one slow step forward. "You can't run faster than a bullet." The cowboy's answer came with action. He swung the barrel of his rifle down and fired into the sand at their feet. The blast kicked up a choking cloud of dust in the confined space, filling the fissure with grit that burned the eyes and throat. "Move!" the cowboy barked. The woman spun, grabbing the nearest child, and darted into a narrow split in the rock barely wide enough for a grown person to fit through. The others followed, scrambling into the darkness. Crowder lunged, but the cowboy stepped into his path, rifle butt swinging hard. The blow caught Crowder across the jaw, staggering him into the wall. The cowboy backed toward the split, keeping the rifle up, his eyes on both Crowder and the shifting shadows of the three riflemen. One of them fired blindly through the dust, the shot whining off the stone just inches from the cowboy's head. He ducked into the split, feeling rocks scrape his shoulders, and plunged into the dark passage. The air was cooler here, the light fading fast. Behind him, the sound of boots on stone echoed as Crowder's men gave chase. "Keep going," he called ahead. The woman's voice came back, breathless but steady. "It opens into a box canyon. From there we can climb out." He could hear the children panting, small hands scrambling over the rock. The space was so tight in places they had to turn sideways, their boots slipping on loose gravel. Behind him, Crowder's voice echoed through the stone. "You're not getting far, stranger." The cowboy glanced back, shadows moving closer, the muzzle of a rifle glinting faintly in the dim light. He fired once, the blast deafening in the confined space, sending shards of stone raining down. The pursuers dropped back for a moment, but not far. The woman's voice rose from ahead. "I see light!" They burst out into the open, a small canyon ringed by sheer walls. Sunlight poured in from above, blinding after the gloom of the fissure. The woman pointed to a slope of broken rock at one end. "That's the way up." The cowboy didn't hesitate. "Go!" The children scrambled toward the slope, the woman right behind them. The cowboy took the rear, pausing every few steps to glance back at the fissure's dark mouth. The first of Crowder's men appeared there, rifle already rising. The cowboy fired, driving him back into the shadows. The woman was nearly at the top now, helping the smallest child over the last stretch. The cowboy started up after them, boots sliding in the loose rock. From below came the echo of Crowder's voice again, closer this time, colder. "You can climb, but there's only one way down." The cowboy reached the lip of the slope, hauling himself up beside the woman. He risked one look back into the canyon and froze. Crowder was standing in the open now, rifle in hand, but he wasn't aiming at the cowboy. He was aiming at the boy. Crowder's finger rested just outside the trigger guard, the rifle steady as a post. The boy froze mid-step on the slope, his small hands gripping a rock for balance. The others had already reached the top, but now the climb seemed like 100 miles. "Send her down," Crowder called, his voice carrying clean in the still air. "The woman! She comes back, the boy lives." The cowboy stepped forward, keeping his body between Crowder's sights and the child. "Let him go, Crowder. This isn't his fight." Crowder tilted his head. "Everything's everyone's fight when you're in my country." The woman started to move past the cowboy, but he caught her arm. "Don't!" "He'll kill him," she whispered. "Not if I give him something better to shoot at," the cowboy said under his breath. Crowder raised his voice. "You've got 5 seconds, you stranger. Then I stop talking and start counting bodies." The boy's eyes darted between the cowboy and the man below, his chest rising and falling too fast. The cowboy met his gaze. "When I tell you run, don't stop until you're out of sight." Crowder smirked, sighting in a little higher. 3 seconds. The cowboy's hands tightened on his rifle. He didn't have time to think, only to act. "On 2, he fired, not at Crowder, but at the narrow ridge just above his head. The shot shattered a section of rock, sending a cascade of debris down like a sudden landslide. Crowder flinched, raising an arm to shield his face. The boy didn't wait for the command. He bolted, scrambling up the last stretch to his sister's waiting hands. The cowboy dropped flat as a shot cracked from below, the bullet chewing a groove into the rock where he'd been standing. "Go!" he shouted to the woman. She didn't argue this time, pushing the boy up and over the lip. The cowboy rose, backing toward the top, his rifle still aimed down. Crowder stepped out from the falling dust, his hat knocked askew, a fresh cut bleeding at his temple. His voice was lower now, the edges jagged. "You just made this personal." The cowboy fired again, forcing Crowder back into the canyon's shadow. Then he turned, grabbing the last rock outcrop and hauling himself over the edge. They were in open country now, rolling scrubland stretching in every direction, the sun already dropping toward the horizon. The woman gathered the children close, scanning for the safest route away from the canyon. "North," the cowboy said, pointing toward a line of low hills. "We can make the ridge by dark." Matthew looked back over the lip, eyes wide. He's not going to stop, is he? The cowboy shook his head. Not until one of us can't get back up. They started moving, keeping low among the sage and scattered rock. Every few steps, the cowboy glanced back at the canyon rim. Halfway to the hills, a single rifle shot rang out, not close, but close enough to carry. The sound froze everyone in place. The cowboy turned slowly, scanning the rim. Crowder stood there, framed by the sky, his rifle resting casually in the crook of his arm. He didn't fire again. He just raised 2 fingers to his hat in a mock salute, and then turned away. The cowboy didn't move for several seconds, his jaw set, before finally nodding toward the hills. "Let's go." They pushed on until the ground began to rise, the first shadows of evening cooling the air. When they reached the shelter of a low ridge, the cowboy finally allowed them to stop. The woman knelt to check the children, smoothing their hair back, murmuring soft words. The boy stared at the ground, hands trembling, until the cowboy crouched beside him. "You did good back there," he said quietly. "You kept moving." The boy swallowed hard. "I thought he was going to shoot me." The cowboy's gaze drifted toward the distant canyon. So did I. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest echo of hoofbeats, too far to be certain, but enough to twist his gut. They weren't safe yet. Night settled over the ridge like a heavy blanket, the stars cold and sharp above. The children were curled together near the woman, who sat with her back to a boulder, her eyes fixed on the cowboy. He was crouched a few paces away, scanning the darkness beyond their small camp. The hoofbeats came again, closer now, unhurried, like a predator pacing before the strike. The cowboy stood, rifle in hand, and met the woman's gaze. "It's him." She didn't ask how he knew. "Then we finish it here." The cowboy moved to the edge of the ridge, peering into the shadows below. A lone rider emerged from the dark, the faint glow of starlight glinting off the steel of his rifle. Crowder didn't rush. He dismounted slowly, almost ceremonially, and tied his horse to a low branch. "You had a head start," Crowder called up. "And still, here we are." The cowboy stepped forward into the open. "You could have let this go." Crowder smiled faintly. "And you could have handed her over, but here we are." He started up the slope, his boots finding sure holds in the loose rock. The cowboy kept the rifle trained on him, but didn't fire, not yet. Crowder stopped halfway up. "You think you can end me with one bullet? You'd better pray you don't miss." The cowboy's voice was flat. "I don't pray." They locked eyes in the stillness, the wind whispering through the sage. Then Crowder moved, fast, pulling his revolver and firing twice. The shots cracked the air, but the cowboy was already diving to the side, rolling behind a rock. The woman pulled the children down, shielding them with her body. The cowboy rose from cover and fired, the shot striking the rock inches from Crowder's head. Crowder ducked, advancing in a zigzag, his boots scraping against stone. At 20 feet, the fight shifted, rifles too slow for this range. Crowder swung his revolver up, but the cowboy lunged, knocking it aside. The gun discharged into the dirt as they crashed together, fists and elbows in the dark. Crowder drove a knee toward the cowboy's ribs, but the cowboy caught it with his thigh, shoving him back. Crowder stumbled, then swung the butt of his revolver at the cowboy's temple. The cowboy ducked, countering with a hard punch to the jaw. They circled, breathing hard, the starlight casting jagged shadows across their faces. "You don't even know her," Crowder growled. "I know enough," the cowboy said. Crowder lunged again, catching the cowboy around the waist, and they slammed into a boulder. The impact sent a shock through the cowboy's spine, but he twisted, getting an arm around Crowder's throat. Crowder snarled, grabbed a handful of the cowboy's coat, and tried to drag them both toward the ridge edge. The drop yawned behind them, 30 feet to jagged rock. The cowboy shifted, planting a boot against the boulder, and heaved with everything he had. They broke apart, stumbling back. Crowder came in again, but this time the cowboy sidestepped, hooking Crowder's arm and using his momentum to send him face first into the rock. The revolver clattered to the ground. Crowder turned, blood streaming from a cut over his brow. "You think that's enough?" The cowboy kicked the revolver away, then leveled his rifle. "It's enough if you stay down." Crowder's eyes burned in the starlight. "Not in this life." He took one step forward. The rifle roared. Crowder's body jerked, his knees buckling before he crumpled to the ground. For a long moment, only the wind moved. The cowboy stood over him, breathing hard, the echo of the shot fading into the night. Crowder's chest rose once, twice, then stilled. The woman appeared beside the cowboy, her eyes wide but steady. "It's over." The cowboy looked out into the darkness beyond the ridge. For him. But both of them knew men like Crowder never truly rode alone. The first light of dawn bled across the horizon, turning the ridge from shadow to gold. The children slept against the warmth of the boulder, exhaustion pulling them deep. The woman sat close, knees drawn to her chest, eyes fixed on the cowboy as he stood at the edge, watching the empty land below. She rose and joined him, her voice low. "They'll come looking for him." He nodded. "Not today. But soon." Her gaze lingered on the horizon. "Then what?" "We keep moving," he said. "Stay ahead of whoever thinks they can finish what he started." The wind tugged at her hair, carrying with it the scent of dust and juniper. "You could have walked away," she murmured. The cowboy's jaw tightened. "So could you, but you didn't." For a while they stood without speaking, the only sound the waking rustle of the land around them. The children stirred, the youngest curling into the woman's side. Matthew rubbed his eyes, glancing toward the spot where Crowder had fallen hours earlier. "Is he gone?" The cowboy crouched in front of him, meeting his gaze. "Yes, and he's not coming back." The boy swallowed, his voice small. "Will others come?" The cowboy didn't lie. "Maybe. But they'll have to get through me first." Matthew's shoulders squared a little at that, the fear in his eyes dimming just enough. They packed quickly, the woman gathering what little they had. The cowboy kept watch, scanning the distant plains for any sign of movement. There was none, not yet. By mid-morning they were heading north, the sun warm on their backs. The children moved more easily now, the tension in their steps eased, though every sharp sound still made them glance over their shoulders. At a rise, the cowboy paused, looking back one last time. The ridge where Crowder had fallen was barely visible now, a jagged line against the land. He turned away, letting it fade behind them. Hours later, they reached the shelter of a shallow canyon with a small creek running through it. The children drank greedily, laughter breaking the silence for the first time in days. The woman sat on a smooth rock, watching them. "You saved their lives," she said quietly. The cowboy shrugged, kneeling to fill his canteen. "They saved mine too." She studied him for a long moment. "You don't have to keep going with us." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Yes, I do." She smiled faintly, the first real softness in her expression since they'd met. The sun dipped low again, shadows stretching long over the water. As the children settled for the night, the cowboy leaned back against the canyon wall, eyes half closed but ears alert. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, the sound carrying across the plain. He thought about Crowder, about the men who might ride in his place, and about the promise he hadn't spoken aloud, that no matter where they went, these four wouldn't face the road alone. The fire crackled low, warm against the cool air. The woman's voice came from the other side of the flames. "What happens when we reach wherever you're taking us?" The cowboy opened his eyes. "We'll figure it out when we get there. For now, it was enough. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales of courage, survival, and unexpected bonds. And if you want to know what happens when a quiet rancher's past catches up to him in the most dangerous way, watch the next story waiting for you right here.